If you're struggling to finish your song, then this is the series for you. In this video specifically, we are going to be breaking down 5 different questions to ask yourself to get unstuck with your song's chord progressions or harmony. Let's talk about it. So let's dive right into the first question to ask yourself, which is simply, what chord in my key have I not started a chord progression with yet? So let's say you have a song in C major and you have your verse and your chorus written, or at least your verse and your chorus chord progression. Let's say that your verse is a 1-5-6-4 chord progression. And then for your chorus, you have a 1-6-5-4 progression. So you've written your verse and chorus chord progression, and now you're trying to figure out where to go with the chord progression in the bridge. So this first question is really just asking, okay, what diatonic chords haven't I started a chord progression with yet in this song? So in the example that I gave, in both the verse and the chorus, we actually opened with a 1 chord. So maybe when it comes to the bridge, we say, all right, both my verse and my chorus started with a 1 chord. So maybe in my bridge is finally time to break away from that and start my chord progression with a chord that is still native to my key, is still diatonic, but it is not the same chord that I've already started both of my progressions with. Now, of course, you can choose any chord, and most likely any chord specifically that is in your key. But if you want a little bit more of a nudge in the right direction, I would say great go-tos are always the 1 chord, which we've already covered. We already have that in our verse and our chorus. And then 5 chords, 4 chords, and 6 chords are also really good go-tos, especially in major keys. So in this case, when trying to decide where to go with our bridge chord progression, we might just say, all right, we've covered the 1 chord twice, so let's pick a 5 chord, a 4 chord, or a 6 chord to open our bridge with. And maybe if we want to go a little more minor, then we would choose the 6 chord, because the 1, 4, and 5 chord are all major chords in the context of a major key. But in the context of a major key, a 6 chord is actually minor. So if we really want to have that bridge sound different and immediately have a little bit darker of a sound, we might want to open it with the minor 6 chord. But at its core, this first question is really super simple. We just look at the chord progressions we've already written and ask ourselves, what's another diatonic chord or another chord that is native to my song's key that I haven't used to start a chord progression yet? This can be a great but really simple way to get unstuck creatively. And it can also be a great way to make sure your song doesn't sound too much the same throughout. Because if every single chord progression in your song starts with the same chord, that's not necessarily a problem, but it might contribute to your song sounding like it's not really going anywhere. So the second question to ask ourselves is, what chord flows most naturally from where our last chord progression left off? So in our last example, the last chord of our chorus chord progression was a 4 chord. And a 4 chord in the context of C major would be C, D, E, F. So it would be an F major chord. So when we're trying to figure out the first chord of our bridge chord progression, a great thing to ask is simply, what would be a really natural feeling transition from the final chord of the chorus? Because we're going to go from the final chord of the chorus directly into the first chord of the bridge, and we want that to flow naturally in a lot of cases. So the 2 chords that a 4 chord most wants to go to usually is either the 5 chord or the 1 chord. Now, we've already covered in this example that we've already started our verse and chorus chord progressions with a 1 chord, and if possible, we want to try to have the bridge chord progression start with a chord that isn't the 1 chord this time. So if we're not going to use the 1 chord, maybe the 5 chord is a good answer, because a 4 chord really likes to go to a 5 chord. It's a very natural, very smooth transition. So taking our chorus chord progression, which was a 1-6-5-4, which is C major, A minor, G major, F major in the context of C major, and then going to the 5 chord at the beginning of our bridge would result in this F major going to this G major to open up the bridge. So this is probably a good question to ask for obvious reasons, but we want our chords to flow into one another in a natural way. We don't want our chord progressions to seem all jarring unless it's intentional. So a great way to figure out the start of your next chord progression is simply to look at the end of your previous chord progression and figure out, how can I have a smooth transition from the end of my previous chord progression to the beginning of this new chord progression? progression. And then we have question number 3, which is sort of the other side of the coin of question 2. And that question is, what chord would be a pleasant surprise to go to next? Very often we want our chord transitions to sound smooth or natural, but sometimes we don't actually want that, especially if we're trying to draw attention to this change. For instance, if going from your chorus to your bridge, you really want to make a point of, hey, the bridge is here, something is changing. Something that people often will do is actually use the relative minor key. So they're actually even changing keys in the bridge to really put a spotlight on the bridge. But another way you can do this without having to go to the natural minor key is simply to choose a chord that is a bit of a pleasant surprise. So still working off of our example, we've already covered that our chorus ends with a 4 chord, and it most naturally and smoothly will transition to a 5 chord or a 1 chord. But maybe we want something a little bit more spicy. So instead of going to the 5 chord like maybe we originally planned because of question 2, we say, you know what, I want a little bit more of a pleasant surprise with where the chord progression goes, rather than it feeling like it goes exactly where everybody expects it to. So if the really smooth, natural next chord would be the 1 or the 5 chord, that leaves the 2, 3, 6, and 7 chords that we can use that would be a little less expected. Now, the 6th chord is still very often used in general, and it also is very often used following a 4 chord, so it really isn't that unexpected. And diminished chords are very rarely used in major key songs. So that leaves the 2 and 3 chord as chords that are good options to go to that are relatively unexpected coming from the 4 chord. And between the 2 and 3 chord, according to a study done by Hook Theory, the 3 chord is way more rare than the 2 chord. So let's decide to go to our minor 3 chord from our 4 chord. So again, the chorus chord progression was this. So if our chorus ends with this 4 chord of F major, then our 3 chord would be this E minor. So let's talk about a few alternate questions that we can ask ourselves to help us finish our chord progressions. One is simply, what chord progression haven't I used yet? And especially if you're someone who still is utilizing stock chord progressions a lot, this can be a great way to go. If you've already used your stock chord progression of 1, 5, 6, 4, and you've already used your stock chord progression of 1, 6, 5, 4, then maybe it's time to pick another stock chord progression, like maybe a 2, 5, 1 for your final song section. Now, I don't think this should be the default question we ask ourselves for many reasons, including the fact that if we are limited to stock chord progressions, we are highly limited as songwriters, and I highly advise that you learn to write your own chord progressions rather than simply utilizing the same 5, 6 chord progressions over and over. But if you're really stuck, this can be a great way to go. And another alternate question to ask yourself is, what chord progression can I go back to? It's not necessarily bad to have 2 different song sections that use the same chord progression. Even though 4 chord songs are sort of made fun of a lot, there's nothing inherently wrong with 4 chord songs. There just is something boring about if all of your songs are simply 4 chord songs. But you can even make 2 chord songs interesting. So certainly there's no rule that you can't simply, for your bridge, go back and use a chord progression that you already used in your chorus or your verse. So if we continue to assume the scenario that I opened this video with, and you've already written your verse and your chorus chord progression, who says you can't simply use your chorus chord progression again for your bridge, or your verse chord progression again for your bridge? Now, of course, if you have 2 different song sections that do share the same chord progression, you still do need to write different melodies for each of them, but that shouldn't be a problem. Actually, reusing your chorus chord progression in your bridge can be an intentional and really great choice if you want your bridge to almost have a post-chorus feel, or to be something that's almost like a hybrid between a bridge and a post-chorus. If you want your bridge to sort of keep up the same energy as your chorus and feel almost like a post-chorus but technically function as a bridge, then keeping the exact same chord progression the way post-choruses often do can be a great way to go. So if you're struggling with finishing your song's chord progressions, there are 5 different questions that you can ask yourself. You can ask, what chord haven't I started a progression with yet? What chord flows most naturally from where my last progression left off? What chord would be a pleasant surprise to go to next? And then the alternate questions of, what chord progression haven't I used yet? And what chord progression can I go back to? And if you want a really simple cheat sheet that will give you all of the different main chords that you have in every single key. For example, you just want to know, okay, if my song's in G major, what are the main chords I have to work with? Then be sure to grab my free guide at songwritertheory.com/keys. It is a simple, very short cheat sheet that will just give you the answer. It will just say, hey, you want a song in C major? Okay, here are the notes in C major, and here are some of the main chords in C major. So if that seems like something that would interest you, be sure to check it out at songwritertheory.com/keys. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful to you, and I will talk to you in the next one.